Superweapons are a staple of sci-fi, and Star Wars has had plenty over the years, from the iconic Death Star to the lesser-known ones like the Dark Reaper and the Tarkin. All of these were devices of tremendous power, but some were more powerful than others. In this video, we'll be taking a look at Star Wars' most fearsome weapons and ranking them from least to most powerful. But before we get into things, we'd like to get our definitions straight. What did or didn't count as a superweapon was sometimes hazy. Bevel Lemelisk, the designer of the first Death Star and other Imperial superweapons, defined them as any weapon that has a destructive capability far outstripping anything else on the field of battle. We're going to go with a more conservative definition for the sake of time. We'll be discussing artificial devices with such power that they could either render a whole planet uninhabitable or do something else that was similarly impressive in their destructiveness. We'll also only be covering such weapons that we have detailed information on. This leaves us with a list of 24 superweapons to rank, some from canon and most from legends, and without further ado, let's get into it. Starting at the bottom, we have 4 superweapons capable of causing planetary scale devastation. Powerful weapons in their own right, but outclassed by the others on this list. In 24th place, we have the Omega Frost, an Imperial superweapon designed by Silas Tage for use by the Tage Code private fleet, commanded by his brother Baron Ormond Tage. The Omega Frost worked by flash freezing all moisture that passed between its 2 conductor towers, and since most things contained moisture, particularly living things, this gave it incredible destructive potential. Baron Tage planned to use the Omega Frost to destroy the entire rebel fleet during the blockade of Yavin, hoping that this would win him enough favor with the Emperor that he could replace Darth Vader as the Emperor's right-hand man. Luke Skywalker destroyed the weapon before it could be used, however, and Baron Tage was ultimately defeated. The Omega Frost had substantial destructive potential. It's never established how close the conductor towers had to be to work, so it's possible it could have been used for planetary scale destruction at a fairly low cost. But it's simply outclassed by the other superweapons on this list, so it ends up at the bottom. Next up, we have the Climate Disruption Array from Canon. This was a network of satellites designed to screw up the climate patterns of target planets, causing immense planet-wide destruction. These devices were used by the Empire in Operation Cinder, laying waste to several planets before being destroyed. Like with the Omega Frost, the potential was there with this weapon, but it simply wasn't as impressive as the others. The planets devastated by Operation Cinder recovered, and many of the other superweapons on this list wouldn't have left that as a possibility. Next up, we have the Dark Reaper, an ancient Sith superweapon later reactivated by the CIS. The Dark Reaper was a dark side-fueled battle platform capable of laying waste to vast regions, obliterating armies, cities, and everything else in its path. It was powered by the Force Harvester, a superweapon in its own right that drained the living force from all creatures in a large radius, converting the souls of sentient beings into destructive power. Just charging up the Dark Reaper caused immense devastation, and the Force Harvester continued to drain the force from entities around the Dark Reaper, providing the weapon with protection. The Dark Reaper then converted the force energy from the Force Harvester into destructive energy beams, which could obliterate just about anything. This weapon was originally built on the orders of Naga Sadow for the Great Hyperspace War, and Exar Kun later used it in the Great Sith War 1,000 years later. Fortunately, the former Sith Lord Ulic Qel-Droma helped Republic forces destroy it. Count Dooku later rebuilt the weapon at the start of the Clone Wars, but it was destroyed in the Battle of Thule by Anakin Skywalker, permanently this time. Like the Omega Frost and Climate Disruption Array, the Dark Reaper was a devastating weapon, just not as devastating as some others. Next up, we have a rather enigmatic weapon of unknown origin, Rokor Gepta's Green Fire. Rokor Gepta was a Kroak who took control of the sorcerers of Tund during the time of the Empire before wiping out all life on Tund using this weapon. Gepta's green fire could completely cleanse a planet of life and all compounds from which future life could arise, even in tiny quantities, and it was also usable in the vacuum of space. Green fire could be stopped with electromagnetic shielding, however, and it was only ever produced in limited quantities. When Rokor Gepta was killed by Lando Calrissian, the secrets of green fire were lost with him, fortunately enough. The last superweapon for this first category was the World Devastator, a massive class of battle dreadnought deployed by the reborn Palpatine's Dark Empire. The World Devastators were enormous capital ships, thousands of meters in length, powered by miniature black holes and almost completely impervious to assault. They were heavily armed, but their most destructive weapons were a set of tractor beams that they could use to tear up planetary surfaces. World Devastators were designed to rip up planetary crusts, then process the raw materials from the rubble in internal foundries, allowing them to churn out waves of TIE-D droid starfighters, battle droids, or even small capital ships. During Operation Shadowhand, the reborn Emperor Palpatine deployed fleets of World Devastators to terrorize the galaxy, most notably sending a fleet to raze Mon Cala. However, the World Devastators were remotely disabled before they could do any real damage, and the Republic was able to seed the droid brains that controlled them with a computer virus, which turned the fleet against itself. Admiral Akbar described the World Devastators as far more lethal than the Death Star, as fleets of them could not only destroy a planet, but they could convert that planet's whole mass into war material. In practice, however, the World Devastators didn't quite live up to the hype. They were extremely destructive, but it would take them a long time, perhaps hundreds of years, to actually destroy a planet completely. On a more reasonable timescale, they would just lay waste to part of a planet's surface, and more importantly, churn out a fleet of Imperial craft. Within the scope of a single battle, a World Devastator would do less damage than the 4 superweapons we've already talked about, but it gets a higher spot due to its incredible production capabilities, which were far more dangerous than its theoretical ability to destroy a planet. In the process of leveling just one planet, a fleet of World Devastators could produce enough ships to conquer much of the galaxy, far more powerful than many other superweapons had. The next 2 weapons on our list, the Planet Killer and the Shock Drum, were fairly similar. The Shock Drum was a large device that generated powerful vibrations which could atomize anything that got too close and eventually destabilize a planet's core, causing the whole planet to rip apart. The Planet Killer, meanwhile, was essentially a bomb that could destroy an entire planet. The Shock Drum was designed by the Republic during the Galactic Wars, while the Planet Killer was designed for the CIS during the Clone Wars. Both could destroy a planet, and both also had a major downside. They had to be placed on the planet they were destroyed, meaning that the weapon would be destroyed in the process. For this reason, we're placing them at the bottom of the list of Planet Killers, with Shock Drum below the Planet Killer due to its longer warm-up time. Next up, we have the Desolator, a superweapon designed and built by the true Sith Empire. This weapon was actually a combination of several other superweapons, including the aforementioned Shock Drum, and it was deployed by Darth Angral in his quest to avenge the death of his son. It worked in 3 phases. First, it would ionize a planet's atmosphere, preventing starships from taking off or landing on the planet. Then, it would ignite the ionized atmosphere, creating an all-consuming planetary firestorm. Then, it would destabilize the planet's core, causing the planet to shatter. It was an extravagant but effective way to destroy a planet, and fortunately, it was only used once, on the agri-world Euphrates, before it was destroyed. Our next weapon was a little different. Known as the Infant of Shah, this was a small statue made by the Salots as a tribute to their god, and it was designed as a receptacle for Force energy. When the infant was with the mother, it was benign, but when the two were separated, the infant could be used to unleash its gathered Force energy in a destructive wave, which could rip apart an entire planet. The Anu Dart terrorist Ashar Korda once attempted to use the Infant of Shah to destroy Coruscant, but he was stopped by Urael Poof, who disarmed the Infant at the cost of his own life. The Infant of Shah was similar in power and convenience to the Planet Killer, but it gets a higher ranking because it wasn't destroyed when it was used. Back to more conventional weapons, we have the Mass Shadow Generator, a device built by the Republic engineer Bao Dur during the Mandalorian Wars. The Mass Shadow Generator weaponized artificial gravity to cause staggering amounts of destruction. It was intended to be used to literally crush the Mandalorian fleet in the Battle of Malachor V, drawing on gravitational anomalies in the Malachor system to amplify its effect, but it ended up being way more powerful than Bao Dur expected. It destroyed the entire planet, ripping Malachor apart and then reforming it around the Mass Shadow Generator. This new, devastated Malachor was surrounded by mass shadows created by the generator, which dragged starships passing by the planet down into its crust, exerted enormous pressure on Malachor's surface, and ravaged the planet with storms. Crail once described just walking on this devastated world as like being buried alive. The Mass Shadow Generator, fortunately, was only used twice. Once in the Battle of Malachor V, and then to destroy itself and Malachor once and for all 9 years later. The Mass Shadow Generator was incredibly powerful, but was very hard to control and relied partly on external gravitational anomalies, which knocks it down a little bit on this list. Next up, we have Star Wars' most iconic superweapons, the Death Stars. The Death Stars need no introduction. They were a pair of enormous, moon-sized battle stations with the power to destroy an entire planet via a massive super laser. Needless to say, their power was enormous, but we've put them in the middle of this list due to a few limitations. The first is the enormous amounts of resources they demanded. The Death Stars were far larger and more expensive than superweapons of similar power that we'll discuss in a bit, limiting their utility and practicality. Of the two Death Stars, Death Star 1 gets ranked below Death Star 2, both due to its fatal weakness and because its super laser had a 24-hour recharge time, making it particularly impractical. The second Death Star was more practical, and if it was completed, it might have been unstoppable, but it was still extraordinarily resource intensive and not as practical as some of the alternatives. Next up, we have another Hutt superweapon, the Darksaber. Not to be confused with the Mandalorian lightsaber of the same name, the Darksaber was a poor man's Death Star based on the Death Star schematics, but stripped down just to the super laser. This made it more maneuverable and resource efficient, but it was still large and armored enough to, theoretically, be hard to destroy, giving it an edge over the other planet killer types we've already discussed. On paper, the Darksaber was a fearsome weapon. However, it gets downranked a little because, in practice, it had issues. The Darksaber was commissioned by Durga the Hutt, who wanted to use it to hold planets for ransom. However, Durga skimped a little on construction costs, and the Darksaber ended up being poorly built. When Durga attempted to test the weapon by destroying a pair of large asteroids heading toward the weapon, the Darksaber failed to fire, and it was destroyed when the asteroids hit it. In theory, it was a fearsome weapon. In practice, not so much. We've given it a high ranking because of how dangerous it could have been if built properly, however. Next up, we have another stripped down Death Star, this time built by the Empire, the Tarkin. Just like the Darksaber, the Tarkin was basically just a Death Star super laser with engines and shields, but it was much larger, much better designed, and much more effective. The Tarkin was quite large, but it was smaller and cheaper than the Death Star, and since it had the same firepower, it was much more practical. The Tarkin was used to crack open Aten II, the galaxy's sole source of stygium crystals, after the mines there ran dry, allowing stygium to be mined from the rubble of the planet, but it was fatally sabotaged by a rebel infiltration team before it could be used on any military targets. Moving into the top 10, we have another superweapon from canon, the Zeiston-class Star Destroyer. This deeply lazy starship design was nonetheless very destructive, packing the planet-killing power of the Death Star into a comparatively small Star Destroyer-sized package. It was far more resource efficient than the Death Star, but it was also far easier to destroy, so we'd say it's on a similar tier. Nonetheless, the reduced resource consumption, allowing a fleet of hundreds of them to be built, gives it an edge, in our opinion. Not much is known about our next superweapon, the Ancient Hutt Empire's feared Planechunga. This was essentially an enormous railgun designed to crack planets open by hurling asteroids at them, and it was used by the Ancient Hutts to punish those who dared to resist their expansionism. The Planechunga was even more resource efficient than the Zeiston, as it just used asteroids as projectiles rather than super lasers, although it was messier in how it went about destroying planets. Still, we're giving the Planechunga a slightly higher spot for two very important and definitely logical reasons. It has a badass name, and it's not from the sequel trilogy. At number 8, we have the Infinity Gate, an ancient artifact constructed by the Qua of Dathomir. The Infinity Gates were essentially stargates that the Qua used to travel across the galaxy, but they could also be used to unleash infinity waves, vast waves of energy that could destroy planets and disrupt hyperspace travel across an entire sector. This made the Infinity Gates unfathomably powerful, but they were limited by the fact that they could only be fired by those strong in the Force, and only through a complex and obscure ritual. Next up, we have our last canon superweapon, Starkiller Base. Built into what was formerly the planet Ilum, Starkiller Base was an enormous battle station capable of obliterating an entire star system from across the galaxy via multiple independently targeted hyperspace-capable blasts. This incredible power, however, came at an incredible cost. Each time the base needed to be fired, it needed to consume an entire star to fuel its operations. This also left Starkiller Base with a fatal weakness. If its energy gathering systems were disrupted, it would explode and a new star would form where it used to be. This weakness, as well as the enormous cost of use, the cost of construction, and the impracticality of the whole thing, put Starkiller Base below our other transgalactic planet killers, but it still ranks high due to its sheer power. Just above Starkiller Base, we have the Corsair, the former flagship of the Dark Lord of the Sith, Naga Sadow. This vessel looked like a standard Derafan-class battleship from the outside, one of many such ships in the fleet of the Sith Empire during the Great Hyperspace War. But the Corsair contained a crystalline, dark-side-powered weapon that could amplify Sith sorcery to alter the dynamic of stars, giving it incredible power. Naga Sadow used this weapon for things like inducing and weaponizing solar flares, but the Corsair's weapon could also be used to rip out a star's core, causing it to go supernova. During the Great Sith War, Alima Kitto used the weapon at the heart of the Corsair to destroy the Kron cluster, causing 10 supernovas at once and destroying the Jedi homeworld of Ossus. However, this destroyed the Corsair in the process, as the ship had to be close enough to a target star to work that inducing a supernova was suicidal. The Corsair was even more powerful and far more cost-effective than Starkiller Base, but its self-destructive nature gets it a lower spot on this list. In the number 5 spot, we have Centerpoint Station, an ancient artifact created by the Celestials. Centerpoint was what the Celestials' Killik servants called a world puller, an enormous space station designed to pull planets through hyperspace from across the galaxy. The station's transgalactic tractor beams could also be used defensively, allowing Centerpoint to destroy planets or even stars from across the galaxy by unleashing bursts of gravitational waves. Centerpoint Station was used by the Celestials to assemble the Corellia system, and then it was abandoned there, where it was later claimed by the Corellians. For tens of thousands of years, Centerpoint was just one of several worlds in the Corellia system, but in 18 BBY, a group of Sakorian researchers learned how to actually use the weapon, sparking the Corellian crisis. The Corellians used Centerpoint as a weapon on a few occasions before it was finally destroyed during the Second Galactic Civil War. At number 4, we have the Galaxy Gun, the Reborn Emperor's favorite toy. This was the Dark Empire's ultimate superweapon, a space station capable of destroying a planet from anywhere in the galaxy. In that respect, it was similar to Starkiller Base and Centerpoint Station, but it was superior to both of them for a few reasons. It was much smaller and far less resource intensive than both of them to start, but more importantly, it fired light-speed torpedoes rather than energy beams. These torpedoes were hyperdrive equipped and armed with particle disintegrator weapons, which had the power to destroy an entire planet. The torpedoes also had their own defense systems, which protected the warheads from incoming fighters or anti-missile defenses, and most importantly of all, they were variable yield. They could be used to destroy a planet, or they could be used to destroy just a continent or even a city. The Galaxy Gun offered the power of Centerpoint Station or Starkiller Base, not only at a lower cost, but also at a much higher level of control and precision. During Operation Shadowhand, the Reborn Emperor used the Galaxy Gun extensively in his bid to terrorize the galaxy into submission, but fortunately, the weapon was destroyed after R2-D2 reprogrammed the Star Destroyer Eclipse II to ram it. Both the Eclipse II and the Galaxy Gun were destroyed, and as it was ripped apart, the Galaxy Gun fired off one last projectile, which was captured by the gravity of Biss, the Emperor's secret throne world, destroying the whole planet. In the number 3 spot, we have the Shuriken device, a largely theoretical weapon, but one that was so potentially destructive that we had to give it a high ranking anyway. This weapon was designed to destroy the planet Shuriken and hurl its fragments across the galaxy, causing a chain reaction that, supposedly, would destroy the entire universe. The device's power was only theoretical and was never actually used thanks to the efforts of Luke Skywalker, so we're putting it at the bottom of the top 3, below super weapons that were actually used. In the number 2 spot, we have what might just be the most ridiculously overpowered piece of technology in all of science fiction, the Suncrusher. This was a puny little starfighter plated with indestructible armor and capable of making a star go supernova, and it was the most powerful weapon ever developed by the Empire. The Suncrusher's quantum crystalline armor made it virtually impossible to destroy. It once survived a glancing shot from the prototype of the Death Star's superlaser, and Han Solo once flew the Suncrusher through a Star Destroyer without any damage. It was armed with resonance torpedoes, which could instantly destroy a starship and cause stars to go supernova, destroying entire planetary systems. Kip Duron, one of Luke Skywalker's students, used the Suncrusher to go on a rampage during a brief fall to the dark side, destroying the Karita system and a few other targets before repenting. Duron ultimately destroyed the Suncrusher by flying it into a black hole. The Suncrusher, at least in our opinion, is among the silliest concepts in Legends, but it's unquestionably one of the most powerful superweapons in the Star Wars universe. In terms of direct destructive power as well as absurdity, nothing could really beat the Suncrusher. But there is one superweapon with far more indirect destructive potential, which we've given the number 1 spot on this list, the Starforge. Built by the Rakatan Infinite Empire circa 30,000 BBY, the Starforge was an enormous space station built in low orbit around Rakata Prime's sun. Fueled by the power of the dark side, the Starforge converted stellar matter into war material at minimal cost, allowing it to churn out endless numbers of capital ships, starfighters, and battle droids. The Starforge could only be controlled by one who was extremely strong in the dark side. Anyone else would be devoured by the machine, which would drain their life force to fuel itself. Even those strong enough to control the Starforge were still affected by it. It fed on the dark emotions that fueled the dark side and so it amplified these emotions in its controllers, steadily corrupting them. But for those of a certain mindset, the payoff was worth it. The power of the Starforge was limitless. It was like the World Devastators, but it worked much more quickly and required far less resources, able to rapidly churn out enough capital ships and fighters to conquer the whole galaxy. The Starforge fueled the expansion of the Infinite Empire, allowing the Rakata to conquer the galaxy and rule it with an iron fist. After the Infinite Empire was destroyed by civil war, it was left abandoned, but later discovered by Darth Revan. Revan used the Starforge to build himself a vast armada, which he used to conquer a third of the Republic in the Jedi Civil War. With the Starforge, Revan was able to more or less fabricate a Sith Empire overnight, and that was despite the fact that he was very restrained in his use of the Starforge, as he was wary of its corrupting influence. His apprentice, Darth Malak, relied on it much more, and his armada would have quickly become unstoppable had the Starforge not been destroyed by the Republic Navy in the Battle of Rakata Prime. But the Starforge had another curious trait that made it even more powerful. It was built with self-repairing nanotechnology. After it was destroyed, it slowly began to rebuild itself, and although it would take untold thousands of years to be fully reassembled, that meant that the Starforge was truly an unstoppable threat. It wouldn't stay destroyed for long, and it would corrupt those who encountered it into using its power for conquest, granting them an infinite fleet with which to conquer the stars. The Starforge wasn't just a superweapon that could be used to conquer all the universe, it was a superweapon that, given time, would conquer all the universe if left intact for long enough. So, that's our look at the most fearsome superweapons in the Star Wars universe. But what do you think? Which superweapon is your favorite? Feel free to post your thoughts in the comments section below. And as always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.